The first playable villain has been added to NTE, and she's one of the most anticipated one, looking really gorgeous overall. And the fact is, she can be fit into very different teams, playing different roles as well. Plus, her combat is one of the most satisfying one with very high tempo. And we just look at Zankou's playstyle and how she plays, and we just feel like it's just so good compared to other characters as well. At least that's what I think. But today, we'll be taking a look at how the meta has changed with Neverness to Everness, which I do think there has been a very direct change in the meta now, where some of the older characters are looking their way down the tiers, which is normal, right? We're having quite a lot of new characters for sure. But yep, for today, let's just take a look at the tier list and take a look at what are the best teams currently for the whole game and how the meta is evolving to be. As usual though, we'll be focusing on what are new characters and some of the changes as well. We'll mention about some interesting parts as well with the tier list, and yeah, let this be a discussion. And with that said, let's jump into it. Just real quick before we start, if you're looking for the best deals for top-ups in games like Neverness to Everness, I'd like to share with you the website I usually use, which is Loot Bar. Loot Bar is very direct. They offer the best prices for the same top-ups you'd find in-game. You can see how much you save right beside the price tag here. You can actually save quite a good amount, up to 25% if you register now with my link and use those new user coupons too. What's best for me is how easy it is to set up. Simply click on my link in the description, register an account if you don't have one yet, select any bundles you would like, complete the payment, choose self top-up, log into your account. Now this is secured since it is set up as a one-time cloud device, so you don't gotta worry about that. You'll then see your account in-game on the browser, go to the store and click on the bundle you purchased. You'll be able to redeem it right away, and voila, you'll have your resources. Then simply log out, your data will be automatically cleared. If you would prefer not to log in, there's even a direct top-up feature where if you bind your email to your game account, you can enjoy direct top-up without logging in even. All the more convenient. I've been using Lootbar for almost 2 years now, and I have had no issues, and they also have thousands of great reviews on Trustpilot. Lootbar's been around the block. They're also used by multiple other big name creators too, so yep, no complaints from me. Just as a side note, Lootbar also has official CD keys on sale for some really big Steam games like Art Raiders. You get up to 80% off for these keys, so yeah, check it out. If you're interested, click my link in the description and give Lootbar a shot. It does help me out a ton as well, so I'd appreciate that. So to start us off with tier 0, we're gonna focus on the newest addition for sure. We've got Zankou in tier 0. Now, if you're unaware yet, Zankou is completely ridiculous. She can be played as a main damage dealer that is a dot damage dealer, or she can also be played as more of a direct crit type damage dealer in a hypercare team of sorts. She can also be played with Daffodil to make a break team of sorts as well against bosses that's suited. She can be the main damage dealer. She can be the sub DPS for Lacrimosa. That is how much she can do and how versatile she really is. Not in a sense where she supports your team, but more in a sense where, first of all, she has the element for it, and second of all, she just works out because of her damage output and how she plays. We'll try and cover one by one though. With a main DPS Zankou, where she's the hyper carrier getting buffed, she'll be dealing a lot of damage, being buffed massively by characters like Iroi or Sakiri, and with all the buffs, she simply will stand on field and do damage. That's honestly a lot of characters, a lot of main DPS in Neverness to Everness, and Zankou is a character that can do that. However, let's not forget, she has actually a lot to do with the dot archetype, which is why you're going to see another type of team where people will be using Lacrimosa and Zankou together to form a dot team. And in that team, Zankou can be played as just a damage dealer or maybe just a sub damage dealer that supports Lacrimosa. It's also because of how Lacrimosa is also the type of character that's so versatile for playstyle. You can really work with that team however you'd like. I personally have tried using Zankou as more of like a sub damage dealer to then put all the dots in, have Lacrimosa come in and be the stand-on field damage dealer. It works out, and honestly, you wouldn't really feel like anyone's the sub DPS. It just feels like both of them are doing massive damage anyway. And with Zankou's dot and Scorch enhancement, you're gonna find a team with Lacrimosa also incredibly strong. I mean, Lacrimosa herself is also really strong. And with a break team as well, it is very possible to play Zankou with Daffodil and just form a break team against bosses sometimes. So I would say that team works against bosses really well, or, you know, stages where you can parry. Otherwise, though, it still is very much skill-based. And I would say it's mostly because of Daffodil, right? If possible, you always want to parry with Daffodil. And that can be based on timing, based on reaction, and based on the type of boss. But nonetheless, Zankou stays at tier 0 because of her numbers just being high enough anyway. And I would say also because of how dang versatile she could be in multiple different top-tier setups. I personally think the queen of damage dealers would be someone like Lacrimosa and Zankou. I still think Lacrimosa, with her potential stuff, would still be better. But Zankou is genuinely one of the best characters of Neverness to Everness. And hey, she's like a fan favorite villain, right? We all remember how crazy the first fight was with Zankou. And yeah, it's honestly even less about her combat now. It's just more for the fact that we can control and play her as the first playable villain of the game. That in itself is just really interesting, and I think a lot of people would have fun with that. But regardless, in terms of performance, no one can really doubt Zankou. She is going to be tier 0. The rest of tier 0 is pretty much the same, with only the removal of certain characters, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, you will notice now that all of the main DPSs at tier 0 are limited batters ever since the release of the game itself, which I suppose is pretty normal, right? I think that has been the case for a while now. But regardless, so let's move on to the hybrid. Here we see the usual, literally nothing changed. And I will add this as well. It seems there's not a lot of hybrid characters being released in NTE, or rather it's just that I feel like characters in NTE doesn't necessarily lock themselves into DPS role, hybrid role, or anything like that. I feel like NTE is more like just there are characters who's supportive, and then there are characters who are just damage dealing, and that's like the two big categories. Some damage dealers support more though, which I guess that's why you have the hybrid role, and some damage dealers just focus on damage more, so I guess that's why there's the damage role, right? If we are to categorize it like that, there seems to be a really lack of hybrid characters being released. Only Hattori is a limited one, the rest are all standard ones, which is pretty shocking. It probably points towards the future. We're probably gonna see more hybrid characters now. But yeah, regardless though, tier 0 seems to pretty much still be Hattori and Zero. I don't think anyone's gonna disagree with that. And then we have the supports. Supports, we have the new character in Iroi. She's the recent release and pretty much the best support in the game right now. And of course, we got the good old Sakiri, that's still the standard character, the goated buffer. But yeah, interestingly, there's also not too many supports in NTE as well. But I guess they did just release Iroi, so they'll probably release more and more in the future though. But generally speaking, you can see that there's a lot more DPSs in the top tier than anything else. Not that it's a bad thing, just means there's a lot of teams that might share the same supportive characters, right? Especially the third slot support, Iroi and Sakiri. I think a lot of teams uses these two. Again though, it's not like you need 4 teams in the game, so it's not exactly a terrible thing. Now we move to tier 0.5. This is where we see the definitive removal of Nanali from tier 0, and Nanali has been dominant in tier 0 ever since her release, and with more and more characters being released that's stronger and stronger now, it seems Nanali's role has been diminished a little bit, and now she's in tier 0.5. It does not mean she's terrible though, but I would say right now there are more people who uses Nanali not as the main DPS, more like just for her anima element to trigger stuff like Blossom and such, or to trigger charge. But then again, there are characters like Julian that could also do that, but I suppose Nanali is the type of character where you can add her into the Julian if you want more damage output, right? And with the release of Iroi especially, that's also anima element, you don't have to rely on say Julian or Nanali for the anima element anymore. A lot of people would just go straight with Iroi, given Iroi's very helpful buffs and good healing with the anima element too, which is why I suppose Nanali is fair in tier 0.5. I don't think she's up there duking with Zankou, but she's still a really strong character though. And if you're wondering, yes, she can still beat every endgame if you have her team perfectly ready. It's not an issue. And for the rest of tier 0.5, we actually see the same characters. Nothing much has changed. I'm pretty sure Hathor and Duran has always been here. So the power scaling for hybrid and support characters, I think is very slow, which is not a bad thing as well. It just means a lot of characters that you start building from the get-go can be used for a long time. And it shows that with NTE, at least so far, building hybrid and support characters would net you the best benefits in the long term, because they are honestly just staying around for a long time. At least that's how NTE releases their characters. There seems to be a lot more main DPSs that are released, and then they all would use some of the similar hybrid and support characters, which is actually better in my opinion than just seeing damage dealers, hybrids, and supports all getting new characters all the time, and then you have to get the newest one or the oldest one are just gonna be terrible. That would be the worst case scenario, which NTE is not skewing towards. So I think this is pretty solid. Hathor and Julian, well, they're both used in charge teams mostly, and Julian used in a lot of different teams as well for gathering and for just Blossom teams in general. Nothing much to be said about those. And then we got Haniel, the free option of the premium buffers in Sakiri and Iroi. And a lot of people should have Sakiri for free, and then Iroi probably pulled because she's generally really insane like that. Haniel would just be the person that you could use in your second team. If you say only have Iroi somehow, or you don't have Iroi, right, then you can have Sakiri in one team and then Haniel on the other team. You don't really have to focus on the psyche element even with Haniel. You can, but you can also just use her general buffs that she has. So yeah, tier 0.5 seems fair to me. And then we move on to tier 1. For tier 1, we do see one change, which is is A6 Chiz being put down now to tier 1. A6 Chiz is a completely free character, and it seems that with the amount of new main DPSs that are released, Chiz is no longer the person that you would consider as tier 0.5. I would say that is totally fair though, but then again, I think if you play her perfectly, maybe she can still be considered tier 0.5. However, tier 1 or tier 0.5, I suppose is where Chiz would be. She's not a terrible character, but a free character nonetheless, and those tend to not be overshadowing like the limited stuff, right? And as for Baitang, he's always been around here, except for maybe the first 2 versions. Nothing much to be said, but hey, he also has the expert tag, so if you play him perfectly, he can be still a tier higher. And then we see the classic Daffodil. Now with Zankou being released, I think Daffodil has even more of like an expert tag than ever. Play Daffodil with Zankou perfectly, you have an insane break team. And while play Daffodil generally perfectly, you also have her in a higher tier for sure. And it also depends on what boss you're fighting. If it's someone that you can parry all the time, dude, Daffodil might even be at tier 0 in the right teams. But I would say Daffodil is still not at her peak potential yet. With more future characters being released that could enhance their Discord Esper cycle, they might actually see Daffodil shooting up in use case. But for now, tier 1 with an expert tag seems fair. And then we have Fadia, more of a survival character for sure. Nothing much to be said right now. And then to move on to the support, we have Adler. You can still use Adler as one of the dot providers to max out Lacrimosa's damage increase. But outside of that though, Adler still focuses more on survival actually, which tends to be a safer option, so a slower option, right? Therefore, a tier 1 Adler seems fair to me. Then we have tiers 1.5, which the only one change is Mint being increased from tier 2 to tier 1.5 now. I feel like it doesn't really matter that much. And it's also kind of due to the fact that there are better supports as well, like Iroi. And because of that, it buffs Mint's performance as well as a main DPS to pull her up a little bit. But it doesn't really matter, man. 1.5 and tier 2, it's kind of just around that sort of performance. I don't think a lot of people are using Mint unless you're just loving the character. So nothing really too much to be too surprised at. What is genuinely surprising though is just how they have a tier 2 literally opened up for emptiness, and then Edgar still can't even be put there. Survival characters tend to be in the like back foot because in a lot of the times people would just expect to be able to evade or expect to be able to heal while being buffed, right? That's why someone like Iroi is that good. But when you aren't really a buffer like Edgar and you're mostly just survival, yeah, it's not exactly going to be the best case scenario for a game like NTE, right? Plus, it just so happens he's Cosmos, and a lot of people are just crutching on the Cosmos from the main character. And considering how useful it is for the main character to just instantly max the Esper cycle with the skill, it feels like Edgar's element doesn't even really help, nor does his role as a survival slot too. Plus, it's not like he's that safe. So yeah, Edgar stays at tier 3, and they have an empty tier 2 slot here. Yep, that'll be all for the meta right now for NTE. I think pretty much we can see a lot of damage dealers, the newer ones, dominating tier 0 now very convincingly. The hybrid characters, there are actually not a lot of hybrid and not a lot of support characters. So you'll see a case of a lot of different main damage dealer teams with the same hybrids and supports, which just means if you see a good support or hybrid character, I think it's really worth pulling because you can use them for a long time, assuming if this pattern continues. I personally find it okay. It just means players that say really love a main DPS don't have to worry about the hybrids and supports. You just pull the 2 that's pretty generally good, and then you pull the DPS that you're going for, and you can use that for a while, and that will be all. There's gonna be a lot more new characters, a lot more new content coming for NTE, so I'm excited to see how the meta pans out. Now that there's an incantation main DPS, there is still a lack of psyche element main DPS that's being released though. So yeah, I wonder what's gonna happen. That'll be all for today. I'll be covering a lot more NTE, so do follow along if you'd like that. And that is all. If you guys enjoyed, take care.